in the heart of America. A farmer starts his day, as he has for generations. But today, something's different. His crops aren't worth what they used to be. His bills, on the other hand, are climbing through the roof. What's going on here? Why are U.S. farmers facing sky-high costs, while crop prices are plummeting? If you've been to the supermarket recently, you've probably noticed it too. Prices are out of control. And yet, you're hearing reports of food prices falling in countries like China and Russia. What's happening to our farmers here in the US, Canada, and the EU? Why is everything so expensive for them, and what are the global powers doing to change the game? It's not just a bad year. It's not even the usual boom-bust cycle that comes with farming. What we're looking at right now is a systemic collapse, but it's not from weather, not from markets drying up. US, EU, and Canadian farmers are being squeezed by something much bigger: inflation, regulations, and trade wars. Farmers in the US have seen input costs, fertilizer, seeds, fuel, skyrocket by over 40% in the past 3 years. According to the USDA, in 2022, US farm production expenses hit $452 billion, an 18% increase from the previous year. In the EU, similar trends have emerged, with skyrocketing input costs exacerbated by strict environmental policies. But why is this happening in the US, Canada, and the EU, while farmers elsewhere are thriving? Have you ever heard about the BRICS trading system? The BRICS trading system isn't just a network. It's a lifeline for nations looking to bypass the US dollar and Western financial systems. And for US farmers, this isn't just a threat. It's a full-blown assault. With the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, forming their own trade bloc, the reliance on the US dollar in global agriculture trade is shrinking fast. In 2023, over 30% of global trade shifted away from the dollar, according to the International Monetary Fund. With BRICS leading this charge, they've created new trade agreements that exclude US farmers from key markets. China, for instance, once a major buyer of US agricultural products, now turns to Brazil for soybeans and Russia for wheat. If you are enjoying our content, please hit the like button. To help us even more, please share and leave your thoughts and feedback in the comments. Your engagement helps us grow. Thank you. In places like China, India, and Russia, food prices are dropping. While US inflation skyrockets, Russia has managed to curb its inflation down to 3.2% by mid-2023, driven by strategic grain policies. India's food inflation, too, hovers at a manageable rate, with prices in local markets steady. But what's the secret? Here's the trick. Countries outside the Western economic bubble are making deals, big ones. Russia and China have been smashing inflation lower with their trade agreements, where Russian wheat and fertilizer deals have kept input costs low for many developing nations. These countries aren't dealing with the same tariffs, sanctions, or environmental regulations that are crushing farmers in the US and EU. Here's where the rubber meets the road, or rather, the shopping cart meets the register. In the US, grocery bills are up 25% over the last 4 years, with eggs doubling in price, bread up 15%, and fresh produce prices skyrocketing. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. Consumer Price Index for food rose 11.4% in 2022, the highest jump in over 40 years. Meanwhile, in nations like Brazil or India, food prices have remained stable, or even fallen. The IMF reported in 2023 that developing countries are experiencing only 3 to 5% food inflation, a fraction of what Western economies are facing. Why? Because outside the US, tariffs and environmental regulations don't keep food and fuel prices artificially high. And global markets are more accessible to nations not burdened by sanctions and trade restrictions. The squeeze isn't just at the grocery store. For American farmers, inflation is a beast that doesn't sleep. Input costs like fertilizer have jumped over 75% in just 2 years, while labor costs and interest rates on farm loans have surged. The American Farm Bureau Federation reported that fertilizer prices in the U.S. are up 300% from pre-pandemic levels. And it's not just equipment or labor. Everything from financing to insurance has gone through the roof. Farmers in the EU are facing similar headwinds, with inflation hitting 9.6% by 2023. They are further hampered by environmental regulations that make food production more costly. The EU's farm to fork strategy, which aims for a 50% reduction in pesticide use, is making farming increasingly expensive, as substitutes are costly and less effective. In the US, farmers are staring at price tags that simply don't make sense. Equipment costs have jumped, with a new combine now costing upwards of $500,000. Repairs are sky high, thanks to the increased reliance on high-tech machinery with proprietary software. And financing. Loan interest rates for US farmers have spiked to 7 to 9%, a threefold increase since 2020. Meanwhile, outside the US, things are different. Farmers in places like Brazil, Russia, and Southeast Asia are getting access to affordable Chinese-made equipment that costs half as much and doesn't come with EPA-mandated engine requirements or high tariffs. For these farmers, the financial burden is far lighter, allowing them to stay profitable even as global markets fluctuate. Here's a harsh reality. While American farmers are tied down by tariffs and environmental regulations, their counterparts in Asia, Latin America, and Africa are benefiting from a different kind of globalization. Chinese farm equipment, built to last but without the price tag of Western machinery, has flooded global markets. In fact, the Chinese tractor and farm equipment market grew by over 15% in 2023, with exports soaring. Farmers in these regions don't face the restrictions on engine emissions that the EU and US have imposed, and they certainly don't have to pay the tariffs that make imports so costly. The result? Equipment is cheaper, more accessible, and farm production costs are far lower. China and Russia have found a way to control inflation by tightening their own agricultural supply chains and leveraging sanctions-busting trade with other nations. While US farmers are paying through the nose for everything from insurance to tractor parts, their counterparts in China and Russia are getting relief. How? Trade deals that bypass sanctions. China's inflation in 2023 is 1.8%. Russia's inflation is 3.1%. compared to 7.8% in the US. According to a 2023 report from Reuters, China has increased imports of Russian wheat by 15% since the beginning of the Ukraine war, despite Western sanctions. Not only are they sourcing cheaper crops, but they're also sidestepping many of the costs that US farmers are crushed under. While Western nations point fingers at inflation, other parts of the world are solving it. Countries across Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia are openly trading with Iran and Russia, whose agricultural products have become lifelines. According to a 2023 World Bank report, nations like India and Turkey have doubled their imports of Russian wheat and Iranian agricultural products. The kicker? These countries are seeing food prices drop, not rise. In places like Africa, where food security is critical, these nations don't have the luxury of following US-led sanctions. They're buying from whoever can provide, often at much lower costs. The result? Food inflation remains relatively low, while US farmers are seeing fewer export opportunities and steeper competition. Between 2020 and 2024, food prices in the US jumped by 25%. In places like Germany and Canada, it's even worse. According to the International Food Policy Research Institute, food inflation is at its highest level in decades. But why? Inflation, supply chain disruptions, and, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But according to experts from the USDA, this isn't the full story. David Malpass, president of the World Bank, has argued that supply chain inefficiencies combined with aggressive U.S. trade policies have compounded the crisis. Simply put, it's a perfect storm of rising input costs and failing global policy. According to the Institute for Food Technology, food inflation is the highest we've seen in generations. More than energy or housing, food is now the top inflationary concern for consumers in the US and Europe. And it's only getting worse. Why? The answer lies in the costs burdening US farmers and the policies that choke their ability to compete. Now listen to this. Many Western officials have pointed to the Ukraine war conflict as the reason for skyrocketing food prices. It's an easy scapegoat. But here's the truth. Ukraine is producing record amounts of food. According to 2023 data from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, Ukraine exported 20 million tons of grain, its highest in history, despite the war. But if Ukraine is producing, why are prices still high? In the European Union, we've seen something strange. Countries like Poland and France have actively blocked imports of Ukrainian grain, despite the continent's food crisis. The reason? Protectionism. According to Bloomberg, the EU has imposed tariffs on Ukrainian food products, including eggs, oats, sugar, corn, poultry, honey, and hulled grains in a bid to protect domestic farmers from being undercut by cheaper imports. But these tariffs are keeping food prices high across Europe. The EU's decision to place tariffs on Ukrainian agricultural goods is driving up food prices within its own borders. The paradox? While Ukraine could help ease the crisis with low-cost imports, European farmers are lobbying to protect their own markets. The Financial Times reports that Ukraine's grain exports have been hit by 20% tariffs, causing prices to spike across the continent. Consumers pay the price for this policy, and American farmers lose yet another potential market. So, what happens next? Will US and EU farmers continue to suffer under these crushing costs? Or will something change before it's too late? One thing is clear. While countries like China and Russia are keeping food prices low, we're headed for an even rougher road ahead. We hope you are enjoying this video. We're thrilled to have you with us today. If our content struck a chord or sparked some inspiration, go ahead and smash that like button and hit subscribe to join our awesome community. Please share this video to help us grow. Your support is super valuable. Check out another video from our channel, which is now on the screen.